The most brutal part about being alone, it's not the silence, it's not the empty house or the quiet phone, it's the realization that most of the people you knew were never truly there. They were there for the buffet, not for the party. Think about it. As long as you were serving, as long as you were handing out attention, validation, free entertainment, and a shoulder to cry on, the room was packed. You were the host of a grand show. But the second you close the kitchen, the moment you stop providing that constant stream of ego boosts and favors, they evaporate. There's no drama, no big argument, no explanation. They just poof. They vanish like smoke, and you're left standing in the middle of an empty living room, looking at the chairs they used to sit in, wondering if a single second of it was real. Was it a friendship, or was it just a long-term transaction? Look at history. Look at Seneca. He was the advisor to Nero, the most powerful and terrifying man in Rome. When Seneca was at the top, he was surrounded by friends who swore they would die for him. They praised his wisdom, they begged for his favor. But when Nero turned his back and ordered Seneca to take his own life, do you know how many of those loyal friends showed up to stand by his side? 0. Seneca, bleeding out in a bathtub, finally saw the truth with perfect clarity. Performative friendship is the greatest farce in human history. Now look at your own life. Look at your phone. How many people reached out to you this week just to see if you were breathing? Not the Instagram version of you, not the everything is great mask, the real you, crude, raw, and without the accessories. Solitude isn't a punishment, it's a metal detector. It's designed to make everything fake go off. It's a filter. And yes, it's terrifying when you look through that filter and see almost nothing left. But I promise you, an authentic void is infinitely better than a room full of ghosts. Why does solitude feel like it's literally killing you? It's not because you're a social creature in some poetic sense. It's because you're an addict in withdrawal. Every time you get a notification, every time someone laughs at your joke, every time you post something and the likes start rolling in, your brain releases dopamine. It's a hit, a shot of I matter straight into your veins. And your brain, that opportunistic little organ, quickly learned that social approval equals survival. You've conditioned yourself to believe that attention is oxygen, and now that the supply has been cut off, you're gasping. You're like a junkie on the third day of detox, staring at a blank screen, waiting for a fix that isn't coming. Think about Skinner's rat. The rat in the lab presses a lever and gets food. It learns fast. But then the scientist changes the game. The food only comes sometimes, unexpectedly. Do you know what happens? The rat becomes obsessed. It presses the lever frantically, desperately, compulsively. That is exactly what modern social interaction has done to you. Intermittent reward. Sometimes they reply. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes you're invited. Sometimes you're ignored. This unpredictability has turned your brain into a lab rat, forever clawing at a social lever that is now broken. Dostoevsky knew this 150 years ago. In Notes from Underground, he wrote about a man who retreats into isolation, away from the performance. He doesn't romanticize it. He suffers. He contorts in pain. But in that psychological hell, he realizes something vital. Every single social interaction he ever had was a carefully orchestrated lie designed to win approval. You're in that same fire right now. Your brain is panicked because it lost its main narrative. Before, it was, I am worthy because people like me. Now, there's no one there to like or dislike you. You are forced to build a new story, one that says, I am enough because I exist. It sounds like cheap self-help, but it's the only way out. Because if you don't build internal value, you will spend the rest of your life begging for scraps of attention. Can you go one full day without checking if someone looked for you, without posting to see who reacts? If you can't, you're still an addict. The pain of solitude doesn't end when you find a new crowd. It ends when you stop needing the drug. Here is a truth that might turn your world upside down. The more you need people, the less they want you. The less you need them, the more they show up. It's a cruel, perverted paradox, but it's the way the human heart is wired. Think about the person you used to chase. You'd text them instantly, you were always available, you did everything to get their attention. And the more you ran toward them, the faster they backed away. Why? Because desperation has a scent. It smells like a burden. But the moment you gave up, the moment you stopped calling and started living your own life, suddenly they're back. They're texting you, asking where you went. Why? Because now you have something they don't: indifference. And indifference is the ultimate form of power. Machiavelli understood this better than any modern therapist. He said, "Power doesn't come from being necessary, it comes from being irreplaceable." You only become irreplaceable when you aren't available to everyone, when you aren't desperate for company, when you have built something so solid inside yourself that the presence or absence of others no longer shakes your foundation. Look at the transformation of Tony Stark. Before the cave, he was the ultimate showman. He was rich, brilliant, and surrounded by people, but it was all superficial. He was performing for an audience. Then he was kidnapped, thrown into a cave, and forced to face his own mortality alone. In that silence, without the cameras or the applause, he built the first suit, not to impress anyone, but to survive. When he came back, he was different. He was less desperate for approval, less available. And that is exactly when he became truly magnetic. People wanted to be near him not because he needed them, but because he didn't. The human dynamic is simple. Nobody wants to carry dead weight. If you're the person who always says yes, who always replies in seconds, who is always there, you become a guarantee. And what is guaranteed loses its value. But be careful, you can't fake indifference. People can smell a game a mile away. If you're just ghosting people to be edgy, that's just another form of manipulation. Real indifference comes from a place of genuine purpose. It comes from finding a project, a mission, or a self-respect that fulfills you more than any external validation ever could. Nietzsche called this amor fati, the love of one's fate. When you stop resisting solitude and you start embracing it, it loses its power over you. And the moment it loses its power, you win. You stop waking up to check your notifications. You stop waiting for a reply. You simply live. Living without desperation is the most magnetic way to exist. People feel it. They want a piece of what you have, not because you're begging for them, but because you are free.
Nobody warns you about this part. Solitude isn't always a spiritual retreat. Sometimes it's a black hole, because being alone doesn't automatically mean you're evolving. Sometimes it's just you, alone in a room, ruminating on every person who ever did you wrong. If your solitude turns into resentment, you aren't growing, you're rotting. Think about Heath Ledger's Joker. He was completely isolated from society, and what did he do with that? He used it to feed his hate. Every rejection became fuel. Every abandonment became a justification to burn everything down. He built a toxic narrative. The world is cruel. People are fake. Everything is chaos. He poisoned himself with his own bitterness. What are you doing with your silence? If you spend your days replaying every betrayal, every time someone ignored you, or every moment you felt second best, you aren't processing, you're drowning. Resentment is a slow, bloodless death. It's a poison you drink, hoping the other person dies. Look at Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome. He wrote his Meditations alone in a tent on the front lines of a brutal war. He was surrounded by death, betrayal, and the crushing weight of an empire. He didn't cry about how lonely it was at the top. He didn't write about how fake his senators were. He wrote one of the most powerful sentences in history. The best revenge is to not be like your enemy. He transformed his solitude into discipline. He understood that resentment is a trap because it gives you a comfortable story. It tells you, it's not my fault, it's just that everyone else is bad. That story protects you from the discomfort of looking in the mirror and realizing that maybe you chose the wrong people. Maybe you were superficial too. Taking responsibility for your life hurts a lot more than blaming the world, but it's the only thing that actually sets you free. You see this everywhere now. People who get rejected and turn into incels, or cynics who hate the opposite sex. People who lose a job and spend years blaming the system. It's the same loop. I am the victim. The world is the villain. As long as you hold on to that story, you cannot grow. You become a character stuck in a loop, repeating the same failures. Solitude without direction is dangerous because it amplifies whatever is already inside you. If you have a tendency for self-pity, it will explode. Try replacing resentment with curiosity. The next time you feel that bitterness rising, stop. Ask yourself, what does this say about me, not them? If everyone in your life was fake, maybe your fake detector is broken. Maybe you were choosing people based on your ego rather than their character. That reflection is the only thing that breaks the chain. Resentment chains you to the past. Responsibility releases you into the future. Which one are you going to carry?
There's a reason every epic story passes through a desert. Luke Skywalker on Tatooine, Paul Atreides on Arrakis, Jesus in the wilderness for 40 days. It isn't a coincidence, it's an archetype. The desert is where there are no distractions, no comfort, no easy escapes. It is the place where you are forced to either face yourself or die trying. Your solitude is your personal desert, and the question isn't whether you will cross it. The question is, what will you build while you're out there? There are two ways to exist in the desert. You can sit in the sand, waiting for a rescue that isn't coming, counting the days until it's over, or you can use that time to build something no one can ever take away from you. Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest samurai who ever lived, won 61 fatal duels, and after proving he was unbeatable, what did he do? He retreated to a cave, alone, for years. He wrote the Book of Five Rings because he understood that mastering the sword was easy. Mastering himself was the real battle, and that battle only happens in the silence, away from the noise of the world. You have that same chance right now. While everyone else is busy filling their void with noise, you are in the silence. You can either go mad or you can evolve. When Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, the company he created, it was a public humiliation. He could have retreated into self-pity. Instead, he used that forced exile to create Pixar and Next. He rebuilt himself from zero without a safety net. Years later, he said being fired was the best thing that ever happened to him because it stripped away the show and forced him to be a beginner again. But here is the part no one prepares you for. The return. Eventually, you will leave the desert. You will step back into the world stronger and clearer, and you'll find that the world doesn't like the new you. When you were desperate for attention, you were predictable, you were controllable. But now, you have boundaries, you have standards. You don't laugh at every joke or say yes to every hollow invitation. Your growth acts as a mirror, showing others that they stayed still. Nietzsche wrote about Zarathustra, who came down from the mountains to bring light to humanity, only to be mocked and ignored. Zarathustra realized you cannot force light on those who aren't ready to see. Your return isn't about reclaiming your old spot. It's about creating a new one where you exist on your own terms. You proved you can survive alone. Now, prove that you don't need their permission to exist in a group. The exile is over. You paid the price of solitude. Don't waste it by going back to the person who made you miserable just to feel included. Look in the mirror. If you recognize the person looking back and you don't need an audience to tell you who that person is, then you've won. You will never be exiled from yourself again, and that is the only victory that matters.